let's get to why this could be a pivotal year for politics. I mean, and by politics, I mean the changing of the horrific predicament for the Palestinians. So this is from Mondo Weiss, which does great work on Israel and Palestine. And he's giving an argument for why this is a turning point for Palestine. And God, I said Palestine because I've been reporting a bunch on the Palestine, Ohio, or East Palestine, I guess. The horror show and train derailment there. Anyway, a turning point for Palestine in global politics, which I also found this article shocking because we've all been talking about how horrific it is for Palestine and how nothing has changed. Like it just keeps getting worse. The settlements keeps getting worse. Just so much is getting worse for Palestine. So it is. So when I first saw this, I was like, really? Things are good for like what is? But this article talks about how we're seeing the kind of foundation of massive change, possibly. The article says one of the more eye-opening aspects of 2023 for Palestine and Israel has been how much has happened while the essential situation for Palestinians has continued its steady decline. The occupation of the West Bank has turned into annexation, and the apartheid nature of Israel has been exposed for more of the world than ever. And, actually, I'll get to that in 1 minute. Fucking incredible poll about the views of Israel across the United States. Get to that in a second. But through it all, day-to-day life for Palestinians hasn't changed all that much, meaning it's terrible. I mean, it's terrible. And I don't know how many of you don't know many of these things, but so many Palestinians have electricity for like 4 hours a day. They have unclean water when they have water at all. They don't have medical supplies. So they have to apply to try and leave certain areas of Palestine to try and get legit medical care, but often they're denied, like a huge percent of the time, they're denied the ability to go get that care. And so something that is often not a death sentence, for example, breast cancer. This is one I remember from Avi Martin's film on Palestine. Something that's not normally a death sentence for so many of us, breast cancer. My mother had breast cancer. Obviously, it's a fight and it's not fun, but the survival rate in the United States is very high, definitely above 80%. I think it's above 90% maybe. And in Palestine, in the West Bank and the occupied territories, the survival rate with breast cancer is minimal. You know, it's like 30% or 20 or something. So dying from things that don't kill people in other parts of the world. And that's because they're not allowed to leave and they're not allowed to get medical supplies. So there's an example. Another thing you should know about Palestine, 50% of all Palestinians are under 18. So this is a nation that's 50% children that is under constant war, just like endless war, endless occupation. It's an open-air prison. Anyway, the article continues. For all this sameness, there are strong indications that 2023 is going to be looked back as a landmark year and indeed a turning point. Profound changes are happening in Israel. The reactions to those changes have yet to be reflected in the halls of power in places like Washington, Brussels, London, Berlin, Paris, and also Poughkeepsie, New York. No, just kidding. I threw that last one in. But as resistant as those capitals are to change on this front, we may well look back at 2023 as a year their shift finally started. The most obvious factor is what is happening in Israel. The obvious continuity between denying the rights of Palestinians and diminishing those rights for Jews is inescapable. They are confronting the fact that it's the settler movement that has been promoting anti-democratic changes and has been increasing its control over the Israeli government and military. So many of you know there were just things passed in Israel that go against what little democracy they have, decreasing democracy. And this means decreasing democracy for the Jews that get to vote there, the non-Palestinian Israelis. And so as they're seeing their democratic rights eroded, this article makes the point that there's been loads of protest, but it's tough for those protesters to single out Palestinians and say, we're fighting to get democratic rights, but not for Palestinians. So in fact, as those protesters fight over their democratic rights, it actually is also a fight for Palestinians to have more democratic rights. While the protests have kept supporters of democracy for all under Israeli rule marginalized, they can't maintain the division between Palestinian rights and democracy. That alternative will very likely coalesce around certain democratic principles in order to oppose the religious parties and the settler-dominated ones. The question is whether that will mean coalescing around right-wing figures like Benny Gantz, center-right ones, or new leadership that legitimately wants to find a way forward for both Israelis and Palestinians. Even that would certainly be a right-of-center government that will be dedicated to maintaining Israel's quote-unquote Jewish character, though. And that naturally will necessitate continued discrimination. But his point is that this is a major change in Israel, and even though it's mainly about the rights of Jews in Israel, the rights to a democracy, it has an impact for Palestinians as well, because it changes the sentiment and the ideas and where people's minds are at and what they're fighting for. But then he continues about the change in the U.S. and in the Democratic Party. We've all rightly made a lot out of the Gallup poll in March that showed significantly greater support for Palestinians than for Israel among Democratic voters. The difference in that poll, 49% to 36%, in favor of Palestinians. And I somehow had missed this poll, but it's pretty incredible that for those people within that claim to be Democrats in the United States, their sympathies now lie more with Palestinians than with Israel. And the level of fighting and effort that it took to get there is epic. But this is an incredible achievement. And here's the poll. So it's for those of you listening to the podcast, it's a chart, a line graph. But Republicans still heavily in favor of Israel over Palestinians. So this is not, here's the thing. And let me say this as a Jew. I'm an atheist Jew, which most people, there's a lot of people who don't understand that, and they go, how can you be an atheist Jew? Well, because you keep your Jewiness no matter whether you believe in religion or not. Anyway, that's a side note. Doesn't really matter. Point is, when I say sympathies lie with Palestinians over Israel, I do not mean that these people are anti-Jewish or anti-Semitic. I mean that they have sympathy for Palestinians who live in an apartheid system and do not have a country of their own and do not have a system of their own and are in an open-air prison. So you can absolutely be pro-Palestinian in that way, as am I, and not, and I realize it's a double negative, not be anti-Jewish, as am I. Those two things go, you can think Jewish people are wonderful and all the wonderful things people have done over the many years in this world, but also Palestinians should not live in an apartheid system where they're fucking exploited every day and they're in an open-air prison and they're kids throwing rocks against tanks. You can believe both those things. And in fact, by supporting an apartheid state, and saying that all Jews support that, you're actually making anti-Semitism worse. And I think that a lot of people don't understand that. They think the least anti-Semitic thing they can do is just support Israel. Yay! But supporting Israel acting as a monster increases anti-Semitism. It increases all the garbage that is spit out about Judaism and the Jewish people. Anyway, but I will say this. So even though the Republican line on this chart is still heavily pro-Israel, not giving a shit about Palestinian rights, just between 2020 and 2023, that support in the Republican Party has decreased 14%. So a pretty massive decrease amongst the Republican Party. In the Democratic Party, it has fallen off a cliff where, quote unquote, support for Israel, which again means support for Israel and not giving a shit about Palestinians, has gone from, let's see, in 2013 and 2014, it was at 35%. And now it's at negative 11. So that's 35%. So this is the margin over support for Palestinians. So when they say 35%, sorry, I said that kind of confusing. When it's 35%, that's net sympathy over Palestinians. Now it's at negative 11 because sympathy for Palestinians is actually greater in the Democratic Party than for Israeli policies, which is pretty amazing. Amazing. And the way they phrase this question, which can have a huge impact, the way they phrase the question is, are your sympathies more in line with Israelis or with Palestinians? And so Palestinians is now at 49%. Israelis is at 38%, and neither is at 13%. So actually, if you add if you add neither and Palestinian, because obviously neither means I'm not going to support Israel's garbage system no matter what. If you add the neither to the Palestinian support, that makes it 63%, 63% of Democrats that are not just blindly supporting Israel, which is amazing. It's amazing. And it's a testament to all the activism, all the endless activism, BDS, all the independent broadcasts like this one, all the independent writing that people have done, all the sharing of voicing of a need for freedom for Palestinians, for their own sovereignty, for their own liberty and life and happiness, and the idea that they shouldn't just be bombed into oblivion without even mattering. All of that activism has achieved this, and it's incredible. But so that is the other thing, that one of the other key things that this article points to as a pivotal shift for Palestine. And then the final one that the article gets into is China, and how China is, there's a lot of shifts obviously going on with the power of China in this world, how it's working for peace deals throughout the Middle East and succeeding in many of them. It's working with Saudi Arabia more. And so China is kind of this wild card where if they start putting more weight against Israel to give Palestinian sovereignty and freedom, it could have a big shift in the region.